A kind waitress named Anna risked her job to defend a confused old man from her cruel manager. She showed him compassion when her boss wanted to throw him onto the street. But she had no idea the old man was not who he appeared to be. The very next day, a mysterious billionaire arrived at the diner. He was the man's son, and he was about to deliver a truth that would leave everyone in complete shock. Before we start the story, your support means everything to us. Like, comment, and subscribe so we can meet again. Anna, a kind-hearted waitress, moved through the lunch rush at the Gilded Spoon, a high-end city bistro where the clinking of champagne flutes was the only acceptable sound. Her heart, however, was several shades simpler than the polished gold fixtures. She was a woman of simple kindness in a world of complex, unfeeling luxury. She navigated the sea of white tablecloths with a practiced grace, her smile genuine, even when her feet ached. She was in her mid-20s, trying to pay for night classes, and this job, with its wealthy clientele and decent tips, was a necessary evil. The real evil, however, was Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies, the bistro's manager, was a man built from starched collars and cold calculations. He valued wealthy appearances above all else, his eyes constantly scanning the dining room not for comfort, but for imperfections. He believed the bistro's reputation was built on a foundation of exclusivity, and any crack in that facade was a personal affront. He was a tyrant of small details. "Anna," he would hiss, his voice a low, grating whisper that cut through the murmur of the diners. "Table 7. The gentleman's water glass is 2/3 full. It should be 3/4. Are we running a roadside diner or a premier establishment?" He would trail her, his presence a dark cloud. "That smile, Anna, it is too genuine. Our clients prefer professionalism, not charity case cheer." He saw kindness as weakness, a stain on the pristine, profit-driven environment he cultivated. Anna endured it all with a quiet dignity, but the pressure was constant. Every shift felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon of unemployment. Davies would publicly humiliate staff, his favorite target being Anna, whose gentle nature seemed to provoke his cruelty. "Your apron, Anna. One small, insignificant crease. Do you realize how that reflects on me, on the entire brand?" He would say this in front of guests, a power play that left her cheeks burning but her spine somehow still straight. She needed this job. She needed the paycheck that was just 2 days away. So she bit her tongue, refilled water glasses, and tried to be invisible, a ghost in a crisp black uniform. But Anna was not built for invisibility. She was built for connection, and in a place that prized cold, hard cash over human warmth, she was an anomaly. Her kindness was a liability. Today, the bistro was particularly busy, filled with the city's elite, and Mr. Davies was in rare form. He prowled the floor like a panther, his eyes missing nothing, especially not his most reliable target. Anna just prayed she could make it through the next 5 hours without him finding a real reason to make her life unbearable. The peak lunch rush was in full swing, a symphony of quiet, important conversations and the silver on porcelain percussion of $100 meals. Mr. Davies was almost smiling, his eyes sweeping over the room. Every table was filled. Mrs. Vanderbilt at table 3, Councilman Bright at table 9. It was perfect. The air was a climate-controlled cloud of expensive perfume and roasted duck. Then, the heavy glass door swung open, its polished brass handle pushed by a hand that had not seen a manicure in decades. The chime, usually so welcoming, sounded like a security breach. A man, who Anna would later know as Arthur, stumbled into the foyer. He was disheveled, his gray hair sticking up in tufts, his coat rumpled and stained with something Anna could not identify. He was not just untidy, he was deeply confused. His eyes, wide and pale blue, darted around the opulent room, taking in the chandeliers and the velvet curtains not with awe, but with a profound, childlike terror. He looked like a man who had woken up on another planet. He began to shuffle forward, muttering to himself, his worn leather shoes squeaking on the marble floor. The conversations in the bistro did not stop, but they faltered. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Mrs. Vanderbilt raised a powdered eyebrow, her lip curling. Councilman Bright looked up, annoyed by the disturbance. This was exactly the kind of crack in the facade that Mr. Davies lived to prevent. Anna, who was nearby polishing wine glasses, saw him first. Her heart went out to him. He looked like her grandfather, just before the end. But Mr. Davies saw him second. His face, which had been placid, instantly contorted into a mask of cold fury. He saw a stain, a problem, a contamination. He located Anna and snapped his fingers, a sound like a breaking twig. She flinched. He marched to her side, his body blocking her view of the old man, though his eyes never left the intruder. "Get him out," Davies hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "He is driving away customers. Do you see table 9? The councilman is appalled. This is not a shelter. Get him out right now." Anna's eyes flickered past him to Arthur, who had just sunk into the plush velvet of booth 12. The prime VIP booth. That was the final sin. "Throw him out, Anna. Do it now or I will, and you will be right behind him." He didn't care that the man was lost. He only cared that he was not, in any way, one of them. Anna took a hesitant step toward booth 12. Her job was on the line. She could feel Mr. Davies's cold stare boring into her back, urging her to hurry, to dispose of the problem. She picked up a water carafe, a weak excuse to approach the table. As she got closer, she saw the old man, Arthur, was not drunk, as Davies had assumed. He was not belligerent. He was trembling. His hands were clasped on the polished table, and his knuckles were white. His pale blue eyes were wide, not with intoxication, but with a deep, bottomless well of fear and confusion. He was looking at the ornate carvings on the wall as if they were monsters about to pounce. He whispered something, just a sound. "Mary, where is the door?" Anna's heart cracked. He was lost. Terribly lost. She set the water down gently. "Sir," she began, her voice soft. "Are you all right?" Arthur jumped, startled, a small cry escaping his lips. Anna's hesitation was fatal in Davies's eyes. She was coddling the problem. He let out a sigh of pure exasperation, a sound that sliced through the dining room. "That is enough, mister." Davies stormed forward, his polished shoes clicking aggressively on the marble. He shoved past Anna, his shoulder knocking her off balance. He loomed over Arthur. "Out," he commanded. Arthur just stared at him, blinking, his fear intensifying. "I said, 'Get out,'" Davies snarled. And then he did the unforgivable. He reached down and grabbed Arthur's thin arm, his fingers digging into the worn fabric of the man's coat. He hauled him partway out of the booth. Arthur cried out, a thin, reedy sound of pain and fright. That sound broke something in Anna. The fear of losing her job evaporated, replaced by a white-hot protective instinct. Before she even knew she was moving, she was there. She planted herself directly between her boss and the old man, her body shielding Arthur. "Stop," she said, her voice shaking but clear. It was not a request, it was a command. The entire restaurant, which had been a low hum of activity, went utterly and completely silent. Every fork stopped, every conversation died. Mrs. Vanderbilt's jaw was open. Councilman Bright was staring, his wine glass halfway to his lips. They were all watching. "What did you say to me?" Davies whispered, his face turning a dark, mottled red. "Get out of my way, Anna. This is your final warning." Anna's hands were balled into fists at her side. but she did not move. She looked her boss dead in the eye. "I said stop," she repeated, louder this time. "You are hurting him. He is just lost." The silence was absolute, a heavy, breathless void, broken only by Arthur's small, frightened whimpers behind her. Anna had drawn a line in the sand, and the entire world of the Gilded Spoon was watching her. Mr. Davies's face was a mask of pure disbelief, shifting rapidly from crimson red to a pale, sickly white. The entire room was so quiet, Anna could hear the hum of the wine fridge. "You are fired," he articulated, his voice low and shaking with a fury so profound it was almost silent. He had been publicly defied. He had been humiliated by a mere waitress. "Get out, both of you." But Anna did not look at him. She had made her choice, and the consequences no longer mattered. She turned her back on her boss, a final, complete act of insubordination. The gasp from the other staff was audible. She gently placed her hand on Arthur's shoulder. The old man flinched, but her touch was nothing like Davies's. It was warm. It was safe. "Sir," she said, her voice a soft anchor in the storm. "My name is Anna. You are safe now. Let's move away from this. Let's go to a quieter table where no one will bother you." She helped him to his feet, noticing the red, finger-shaped marks on his thin arm where Davies had grabbed him. A fresh wave of protective anger washed over her, solidifying her resolve. She slowly guided him past the silent, staring tables, past the open-mouthed councilman, and led him to a small two-person booth in the very back, a nook usually reserved for staff on their breaks. It was out of sight. It was safe. Davies, now apoplectic, was shouting for security. But the two guards, seeing a young woman gently helping a trembling old man, hesitated at the entrance, their expressions deeply uncomfortable. They were paid to stop threats, not acts of basic human decency. Anna settled Arthur into the booth and said, "Please, wait here. I will be right back." She walked directly to the kitchen, ignoring Davies's order to leave the premises. She went to the POS terminal, pulled her own worn leather wallet from her apron, and extracted a crumpled $20 bill, her own money, her tip money from the last 3 tables. She punched in an order for a bowl of the chef's chicken and vegetable soup and a pot of chamomile tea. The chef, who despised Davies, saw the order and nodded grimly, plating it himself in under 60 seconds. She returned to the booth, a tray in her hands. She placed the steaming soup and the fragrant tea in front of Arthur. "Here you go. This is hot. It will help. Please, eat." Arthur looked at the soup, then at her, his eyes still clouded, but a single, slow tear tracked down his weathered cheek. He picked up the spoon. Anna sat across from him, creating a small, safe bubble in the midst of the chaos. "It is okay. You are safe, Arthur." She said his name, hoping it might ground him. "No one is going to hurt you now." Mr. Davies was a statue of pure, unadulterated rage. He stood by the main computer, his arms crossed so tightly it seemed his starched white shirt might rip. He was watching Anna, his eyes like 2 small, icy daggers. He was, for the moment, paralyzed. He had fired her, but she had refused to leave. He had called for security, but they were now standing awkwardly by the entrance, clearly unwilling to physically drag a young woman out for an act of kindness. The entire dining room was a field of tension, with patrons like Mrs. Vanderbilt whispering furiously to their companions, their lunch forgotten. Anna, however, was focused entirely on the man in front of her, Arthur. He was sipping the tea, his trembling hands now requiring both to lift the cup. He'd eaten almost half the soup. Color was returning to his cheeks, but the fog of confusion had not lifted. Anna knew this was not a solution. She had delayed a crisis, but she had not solved it. She had to find his family. She leaned forward, keeping her voice low. "Sir, is there anyone I can call for you? A wife, a son or daughter?" Arthur looked up, his pale blue eyes struggling to focus on her. "Mary," he whispered. "Mary is waiting, but Mary, she..." He trailed off, his face clouding with fresh distress. Anna's heart ached. She had to try another way. "May I see if you have an identification card?" she asked gently. "Just to find a number for your family." He just blinked at her. She took a deep breath. "Sir, in your coat pocket. Do you mind if I just look in this one pocket right here?" She pointed, her movements slow, non-threatening. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Davies saw this. He saw her reach toward the old man. "Thief." He hissed to the security guard beside him. "Now she is robbing him. Go." But before the guards could move, Anna had slipped her fingers into the side pocket of his rumpled coat. Her fingers brushed against a small, hard rectangle. She pulled it out. It was not a cheap, worn-out wallet. It was a single, heavy-stock leather card case. It was old, but the leather was impossibly soft, the kind of quality that cost more than her entire week's pay. A cold dread, mixed with a strange new curiosity, washed over her. She opened it. Inside there was no cash, just one, solitary, black card. It was thick, with a texture like linen. In the center, in simple, embossed gold letters, it read, "Arthur Sterling." The name meant nothing to her, but it felt important. Then she saw the back. Her heart hammered against her ribs. In the same elegant gold script it said, "In case of emergency, please contact the office of." Below it was a single phone number, an area code she did not recognize, but that just felt different. It was the only clue. It was everything. Anna looked at the black card, her hand trembling. The name felt impossibly heavy. She had to call. "Mr." Davies was still fuming by the POS station, his face a thundercloud, but his attention was momentarily diverted by Councilman Bright, who was snapping his fingers and complaining loudly about the spectacle. This was her only chance. She gave Arthur a small, reassuring smile. "I will be right back. I am just going to make a phone call to help you." Arthur nodded, his eyes fixed on the teacup. Anna stood and walked away from the booth, her every step feeling judged. She could feel the stairs of the dining room on her back. Davies saw her move. "Anna," he barked, his voice carrying across the room. "Where do you think you are going? I am just checking on the kitchen for table 5. She lied, her heart pounding in her throat. She didn't go to the kitchen. She bypassed it, slipping into the narrow, gray service corridor that led to the staff lockers and the back-office phone. It was the only landline Davies didn't hover over. Her fingers, slick with nervous sweat, fumbled as she punched in the numbers. It was a long number, not a standard local one. She pressed the cold plastic receiver to her ear, expecting a familiar ring. Instead, there was a single, crisp electronic beep, and then absolute silence. For a second, she thought it was disconnected. Then, a voice spoke. It was not a hello, it was not a greeting. It was one word, spoken with such cold, flat authority that Anna's blood chilled. "Speak." It was a man, his voice devoid of any emotion. Anna stammered, her words tumbling out. "Hello." "Yes, my name is Anna. I am a waitress at the Gilded Spoon restaurant, the bistro on Main Street. I found a man. His name is Arthur Sterling." She rushed the words. "He is safe. He is with me. But he is very confused and he was scared." There was a pause. Anna could hear the faint, rapid click-click-click of a keyboard in the background. The Gilded Spoon. 240 Main Street. "We have your location." The voice was flat. He wasn't surprised. "Keep him safe. We are on our way." "Wait," Anna said, a sudden panic rising. "Who is this? Can you tell me who you are?" The line clicked. He had hung up. Not a goodbye, not a thank you, not an estimated time, just a final, absolute click. Anna stood in the gray hallway, the receiver still pressed to her ear, a dial tone buzzing. A new kind of fear, different from her fear of Davies, settled over her. This was bigger. This was a world of cold voices and instant efficiency. She had just set something powerful in motion. She hung up the phone. All she could do now was go back to Arthur and wait. Anna walked back to the dining room, the dial tone buzzing in her memory. She slid back into the booth opposite Arthur. He had finished the soup. He looked calmer, the warmth and food having steadied him, though the fog in his eyes remained. She gave him a smile she hoped was reassuring. "Help is coming, Arthur. I just made a call." Mr. Davies was still fuming, pacing near the front door, clearly waiting for his security guards to act. He saw Anna sit back down and his face purpled. He pointed a finger at her. I told you. You are fired." It felt like less than 10 minutes. In fact, Anna was sure it was closer to 7. A car, a black sedan with windows so dark they looked like polished obsidian, glided to the curb. It was not a limousine. It was something more serious. A car that meant business, quiet and expensive. A man in a dark, perfectly tailored suit emerged from the passenger side. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with precision. He entered the restaurant, his eyes scanning the room for less than a second before they locked onto Arthur. Mr. Davies, seeing another wealthy-looking patron, instinctively moved to intercept him, his manager's smile plastered on. "Sir, welcome to the Gilded Spoon. A table for one." The man in the suit did not slow down. He did not even look at Davies. He simply held up a hand, a universal gesture for stop talking, and continued walking. He stopped at the booth. He looked at the empty soup bowl, the teacup, and then at Anna. His face was blank. Then he looked at Arthur. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice soft, almost warm. It was not the cold voice from the phone. "We are here to take you home." Arthur looked up, and for the first time, a spark of recognition. He nodded. The man in the suit then turned his gaze to Anna. His eyes were sharp, analytical. He saw the name tag. "Anna," he said. "You are the one who called." "Yes," Anna whispered. "Thank you for your assistance." His voice was professional, but there was a hint of gratitude. He helped Arthur to his feet, as gently as one would handle antique glass. As Arthur stood, he turned to Anna. He didn't speak. He just reached out his thin, frail hand and squeezed hers. It was a gesture of immense gratitude, a silent thank you that said more than any words could. Then he was gone, guided out the door by the silent man in the suit and into the black car that disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. The black sedan pulled away from the curb, its movement smooth and silent, as if it had never been there at all. The dining room of the Gilded Spoon, which had been frozen in a state of suspended animation, slowly began to thaw. The quiet murmur of conversation resumed, forks and knives began to clink again, though many eyes, including Mrs. Vanderbilt's and the councilman's, were still darting between the front door and Anna. Anna herself let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 20 minutes. Arthur was safe. That was all that mattered. She picked up the empty soup bowl and the teacup from booth 12, her hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. The immediate crisis was over, but the personal one was just beginning. She turned from the booth and found herself face to face with Mr. Davies. His face was no longer red. It was a pale, waxy color, a mask of cold, controlled rage. He had waited until the mysterious, expensive-looking man was gone. He had waited until he had his audience back. He had waited to re-establish his dominance. He stepped so close to Anna that she could smell his overly sharp cologne. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His whisper was more frightening than any shout. "You are lucky they picked him up," he hissed, his words precise and sharp like little shards of ice. He meant, "You are lucky he was important." If he had been a nobody, you would be on the street right now. Anna just stared at him, her heart sinking. She had done the right thing, but in his world, the right thing was irrelevant. You embarrassed me, he continued, his eyes narrowing to slits. You embarrassed this entire establishment, in front of Councilman Bright, in front of Mrs. Vanderbilt. You brought the gutter into my dining room. I was just trying to help, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I do not pay you to help, he snapped, cutting her off. I pay you to follow instructions, and your instruction was to remove the problem. He straightened his tie, a sharp, angry gesture of self-control. You are on your final warning, Anna. One more stunt like that, one more toe out of line, one more act of ridiculous sentimental charity, and you are fired. Do you understand me? He leaned in closer, his gaze burning with contempt. We have standards here. You are not paid to feel. You are paid to work. He didn't wait for an answer. He spun on his heel and marched toward Councilman Bright's table, his face instantly transforming into a mask of obsequious apology, ready to offer a free bottle of wine to smooth things over. Anna was left standing alone in the middle of the room, feeling small and utterly isolated, her insides hollow. She was on her final warning. She still had her job, but just barely. Anna arrived for her shift the next day at 11:30 sharp. She had barely slept. The encounter with Arthur, the chillingly efficient voice on the phone, and the venom in Mr. Davies's final warning had replayed in her mind all night. The dread in her stomach was a cold, heavy stone. She had spent an extra 20 minutes on her uniform, steaming out every microscopic crease, polishing her shoes until they gleamed, and tying her hair back so tightly it pulled at her temples. She could not afford to give Davies a single reason. As she walked the last 2 blocks, the city felt impossibly normal. People hurried to meetings, taxis honked, the smell of coffee wafted from a corner cafe. But for Anna, it all felt brittle, like a thin sheet of ice over a dark, deep lake. She was terrified of losing her job. Her rent was due at the end of the week, and her night school tuition payment was already late. This job, despite its toxic manager, was her lifeline. She paused outside the heavy glass doors of the Gilded Spoon, taking one deep, shuddering breath. She could do this. She just had to be invisible. She would be a robot. Refill water, take orders, clear plates, and never, ever make eye contact with Mr. Davies. She pushed the door open. The bistro was already humming with the start of the lunch rush. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, glinting off the polished gold fixtures and the rows of sparkling wine glasses. It was bright and beautiful, a stark contrast to the anxiety twisting her insides. She saw him immediately. Mr. Davies was standing near the host station, his back to her, inspecting the reservation book with a critical eye. He looked immaculate, his suit perfectly pressed, his posture rigid. Anna slipped past, her heart hammering, and headed straight for the staff changing room. She clocked in. A few of the other servers were already there, bustling and preparing for their shifts. One of them, Maria, a kind woman who had been there for 5 years, caught her eye and gave her a small, sympathetic look. "He is in a terrible mood," Maria whispered, "even worse than usual." "Just keep your head down." Anna nodded, her stomach tightening into a painful knot. She grabbed her apron, her hands not quite steady, and tied it securely. She was on her final warning. The words echoed in her head. She was walking a tightrope, and the slightest breeze would send her falling. She smoothed the apron one last time, fixed a polite, neutral smile onto her face, and pushed through the door into the dining room. The bistro was already busy. She just had to survive. Anna was just 3 tables into her shift, her movements almost comically quick and robotic. She delivered a bottle of San Pellegrino to Councilman Bright, who did not even look up, just gave a dismissive nod. Mr. Davies was hovering near the bar, his arms crossed, his eyes tracking her every single move, a small, cruel smirk playing on his thin lips. He was enjoying this. He was waiting for her to fail, to drop a glass, to use the wrong fork. Anna's hands were clammy, but her smile was fixed, a painful mask she had to maintain. She turned from the councilman's table, her heavy tray held high, and that is when she saw it through the window. It was not just a car, it was an event. A black Rolls-Royce so impossibly long and polished it looked like a solid block of wet obsidian, glided to the curb with a silence that was more intimidating than any loud engine. It was not like the usual Mercedes or BMWs in the valet line. This car was different. It didn't just look expensive, it looked important. It radiated an aura of old money and untouchable power that made every other vehicle on the street look like a child's toy. Mr. Davies saw it too. His entire body went rigid. His smirk vanished, instantly replaced by a look of bug-eyed, almost comical awe. His jaw went slack. This was not just a VIP. This was the kind of money and power he had only dreamed of serving. This was royalty. The back door of the Rolls-Royce opened, not by the passenger, but by a driver in a full, crisp grey uniform who seemed to materialize on the sidewalk. A single, impeccably polished black shoe emerged, followed by a man. He was tall, far taller than Davies, and wore a suit of such perfect, dark charcoal tailoring that it looked less like clothing and more like an integral, formidable part of him. He was perhaps in his late, demanding 40s, his dark hair just beginning to touch with silver at the temples, his face all sharp angles and cold, piercing blue eyes. They were the exact same eyes as Arthur. He checked his watch, a simple, elegant piece on a plain black leather strap that Anna knew cost more than her entire year's salary, and then moved toward the bistro's heavy glass door. He did not hurry. He did not have to. The world, it seemed, would wait for him. The chime on the door sounded a clear, bright note in the suddenly hushed room. The man, Arthur's son, stepped inside. The entire bistro, which had been buzzing with lunch, felt a sudden, palpable drop in temperature. His presence was a vacuum, sucking the warmth and chatter right out of the air. He did not look around. He did not wait for the host. His cold, analytical gaze swept the room once, a general scanning the battlefield, and then it locked directly onto Anna. The CEO's son stood in the foyer, a silent, unmoving statue of immense power. His presence had frozen the room in a state of suspended animation. Mr. Davies, however, thawed instantly. The man's cold, tyrannical rage, which had been simmering all morning directed at Anna, simply evaporated. It was replaced by something entirely different, something oily and obsequious, a desperate fawning he reserved for the ultra-wealthy. This was not just a guest, this was the guest. The kind of man Davies had built his entire petty kingdom to impress. His eyes, which had been narrowed in contempt for Anna, widened with a greedy, almost manic hunger. He saw the suit, he saw the aura. He saw the Rolls-Royce still gleaming at the curb. He began to move from behind the host stand, his steps quick and almost skittering, a complete betrayal of his usual measured, dominant pace. Anna, who was closest to the door, was still holding her empty tray, paralyzed by the man's piercing blue eyes. She was in the way. Davies was upon them in a second. He saw Anna, standing there like a stunned deer, and his fawning expression soured for a brief microsecond. She was an imperfection. She was blocking his path to power. "Welcome, sir," he started to say. But he realized Anna was still between him and the CEO. With a sharp, contemptuous shove, he pushed her. It was not a gentle nudge. It was a violent, dismissive push that sent Anna stumbling backward. She yelped, her heavy silver tray clattering loudly against a brass rail as she fought for balance, the metal ringing out like a fire alarm in the silent room. The sound was the only noise. Davies didn't even look at her. He had already turned his full, beaming reptilian attention to the CEO. Son, his hands clasped, his spine suddenly bent in a pathetic, unofficial bow. "Welcome, sir. Welcome to the Gilded Spoon. I am Mr. Davies, the general manager. A table for you, of course. Your table is ready, right this way." He gestured toward the prime booth, the very one Arthur had occupied, as if he had been expecting him all along. The CEO's son had not moved. His gaze, which had been locked on Anna, shifted. He slowly, deliberately, looked at Mr. Davies. He looked at the man's fawning smile. He looked at his outstretched hand. He looked at Anna, who was now clutching her tray, her face burning with a shame so deep it was painful. Then his eyes returned to Davies. There was no warmth. There was no acknowledgement. There was only ice, a look so cold, so utterly devoid of feeling, that Davies's smile faltered, his hand freezing in midair. The look was a silent, brutal dismissal of his entire existence. Mr. Davies's hand remained frozen in the air. The silence in the bistro was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The clatter of Anna's tray was the last sound anyone had heard. Mr. Sterling did not move. His ice-blue eyes stayed locked on Mr. Davies for a long, agonizing moment. Mr. Davies's smile began to twitch, the muscles in his cheek spasming. He looked like a man who had just run into a wall of glass. Finally, Mr. Sterling spoke. His voice was not loud, it was low, deep, and carried across the silent room with an effortless authority that sliced through the tension. "I am not here for lunch." The words were simple, they were devastating. Mr. Davies, who had offered a table, instantly looked like a fool. His hand, which was still half raised, dropped to his side as if it had been cut off. He stammered, "Sir, I do not understand." The CEO's son ignored him completely, as if he were a piece of furniture. His gaze moved past the humiliated manager and locked, once again, onto Anna. She was still standing by the brass rail, her face pale, her knuckles white where she gripped the tray. She looked like a mouse spotted by an eagle. "I am looking for Anna." The entire room, including Mrs. Vanderbilt and the councilman, turned their heads to stare at Anna. She felt like 1,000 hot spotlights had just been aimed at her. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. Mr. Davies looked back at her, his expression a grotesque mix of confusion and new, dawning horror. This was impossible. This powerful man could not be here for her. The CEO's son took one deliberate step forward, moving into the center of the room. He needed to make this clear. "She helped my father, Arthur Sterling, yesterday." The name dropped into the room like a 10-ton weight. Arthur Sterling. Anna's mind raced. The confused old man. Arthur Sterling. The councilman at table 9 visibly paled. He knew that name. Mrs. Vanderbilt's hand flew to her mouth. Everyone in this room, this world of wealth and power, knew that name. Everyone, it seemed, except Mr. Davies, whose face was a blank mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. He just stared. He had no idea what had happened yesterday. He had no idea the man he tried to throw out was Arthur Sterling. And he had no idea the man standing in front of him was the heir to the Sterling Empire. He just knew, in that gut-sinking moment, that he had made a terrible, terrible mistake. Mr. Davies's face, which had been pale with confusion, began to drain of all remaining color. He was a man watching a guillotine blade slowly click into place above his neck. Arthur Sterling. He still could not make the connection. He just knew the name was important, and that this powerful man was here for the waitress he had just pushed. He opened his mouth, a small, fish-like gasp. But, sir, The CEO's son, Mr. Sterling, looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. He was not just an inconvenience. He was a specimen. "My father," Mr. Sterling continued, his voice still low, still calm, still cutting through the room like a diamond blade, "is the founder and chairman of the Sterling Corporation." The name hit Mr. Davies like a physical blow. The Sterling Corporation, the largest commercial real estate and investment firm in the entire state, the company whose name was on half the skyscrapers in the city. The councilman at table 9 looked like he was about to be physically ill. He knew exactly who Arthur Sterling was. Mrs. Vanderbilt's powdered face was a mask of pure, unfiltered shock. They all knew. The man Mr. Davies had tried to throw out was not just a rich man, he was the rich man. And this, standing before him, was his son. Mr. Davies began to tremble, a fine, uncontrollable tremor in his hands. "And this building," Mr. Sterling added, his voice dropping another level, making the final, fatal connection. "This bistro. The corporation that owns this 5th building, it's one of his." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Mr. Davies's knees literally buckled. He grabbed the host stand to keep himself upright. His world had not just tilted, it had inverted, it had collapsed. The man he had grabbed, the man he had called a vagrant, the man he had ordered Anna to throw onto the street. He owned the ground beneath their feet. He owned the marble. He owned the polished gold. He owned Mr. Davies's job, his restaurant, his entire pathetic little kingdom. The realization was so catastrophic, so complete, that Mr. Davies could not even speak. He just stood there, his face the color of wet ash, his mouth hanging open, as the full, crushing weight of his actions from yesterday finally became clear. He was not just in trouble. He was finished. Anna watched, her own heart hammering, as the man who had terrorized her for months completely fell apart with just 2 sentences. Mr. Davies, cornered and seeing his entire career evaporating in the span of 30 seconds, did what all cowards do. He looked for a scapegoat. His mind, trapped and panicking, latched onto the only person he could blame. He turned on Anna. His eyes, wide and wet with a desperate reptilian fear, darted from the ice-cold face of Mr. Sterling to the waitress who was still clutching her silver tray. She was the cause. In his twisted, self-serving mind, she was the one who had brought this catastrophe upon him. He lunged forward, not physically, but verbally, his voice a high, cracking, pitched whine that was a pathetic echo of his usual authoritarian bark. "Sir, please, you do not understand." He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Anna. "She was reckless. I was protecting your father, I swear." He was confused. He was a danger to himself. He was upsetting the other guests. I was trying to maintain order, to protect his dignity. She defied me. She made a scene. She brought him in and caused this whole spectacle." He was babbling, his words tumbling out, a pathetic, desperate waterfall of lies. He was trying to rewrite history in real time. He was trying to paint himself as the hero, the loyal soldier who had protected the great Arthur Sterling from a well-meaning but dangerously foolish waitress. He was lying, and everyone in the room knew it. The air was thick with his dishonesty. Anna just stared at him, stunned into silence by the sheer, breathtaking audacity of his lie. The CEO's son, Mr. Sterling, had not moved a single muscle. He simply watched, his expression unreadable, his stillness a terrible judgment. He let Mr. Davies dig his own grave. He let the pathetic words hang in the air and curdle, poisoning the atmosphere. Then, slowly, he raised one hand. It was a simple, short gesture, palm forward. It was not a plea, it was a command. "Stop." Mr. Davies's words died in his throat, choking him. He stopped babbling instantly, as if a switch had been thrown, his mouth hanging open mid-lie. The silence that returned was even heavier than before. Mr. Sterling let the silence stretch for 1, 2, 3 agonizing beats. Then he spoke, his voice still low, still fatally calm. "Stop. My father told me everything." This sentence was the final nail. Mr. Davies visibly flinched, as if he had been physically struck. "Everything," Mr. Sterling confirmed, his ice-blue eyes boring into the manager, pinning him to the spot. "He is old. His memory is not what it was, but he does not forget indignity. He told me how you shouted at him. He told me how you grabbed him." His voice hardened, losing its calm and gaining a sharp, dangerous edge. "He told me how you tried to throw him out, like trash." And then his gaze shifted, moving from the cowering manager to Anna, and his expression softened, just for a second, with something that looked like respect, and he told me how she defended him. He told me how she was the only person in this entire building who showed him a single moment of kindness. Mr. Sterling locked eyes with the terrified Mr. Davies. The manager was a complete wreck. His face was the color of old parchment, his entire body vibrating with a terror so profound it was almost pathetic. He was a small, cruel man, suddenly facing an immense and righteous power, and he had been caught in an unforgivable lie. The CEO's son let the silence stretch, letting the full weight of his last words. "He told me everything. Settle over the room. He was the judge and the jury and the executioner, and the time for appeals was over." He took one slow step closer to Mr. Davies, who flinched and tried to shrink back, but the host's stand was at his back. He was trapped. Mr. Sterling spoke, his voice no longer cold and analytical, but filled with a low, controlled, and deeply personal anger. "You humiliated him." He did not say "my father." He said "him," giving the word a terrible weight. "You humiliated a man who built this city while you were still learning to tie your shoes. A man who has given more to this community in a single day than you have in your entire parasitic life. You saw a confused old man, and you saw weakness. You saw a target. You saw trash to be taken out." Mr. Davies was openly weeping now, silent tears of pure fear streaming down his waxy cheeks. He tried to speak, a small squeak escaping his throat, but Mr. Sterling raised his hand again, and the sound died. Councilman Bright was staring intently at his water glass, refusing to look up. Mrs. Vanderbilt looked horrified, but also completely enthralled by the raw, corporate justice. And then Mr. Sterling's gaze flickered to Anna, who was still standing, frozen by the rail. "And you," he said back to Davies, his voice dropping with a new, dangerous quiet. "You threatened the one single person in this room who showed him any dignity, the one person who saw a human being instead of a problem. You threatened her job, you pushed her, you humiliated her for an act of basic compassion." The contrast hung in the air, the perfect, awful summary of Mr. Davies's character. He had attacked the very best of humanity to protect his own shallow, superficial world. Mr. Sterling looked at him, his eyes filled with a final, damning contempt. He had made his choice. He had weighed Mr. Davies in the balance and found him utterly, completely wanting. The judgment was about to be passed. There was no appeal. This was the end. Mr. Sterling held his gaze on the pathetic, weeping manager for one more second, his face a mask of cold finality. Then he did something that was almost more brutal than his anger. He dismissed him. He turned his back on Mr. Davies completely, as if the man had ceased to exist. He took a single step toward Anna, who was still standing by the rail, a silent witness to the total destruction of her tormentor. His entire demeanor shifted. The ice in his eyes thawed, replaced with something that looked remarkably like respect. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer a weapon. It was quiet. "Anna," he said, and she flinched, not used to being the center of this kind of attention. He waited until her eyes met his. "My father believes in two things, Anna. He believes in rewarding kindness, and he believes in punishing cruelty." He held her gaze, and in that moment an unspoken alliance was formed. A debt was being repaid. She had shown kindness. Now he was here to deliver the other half of that equation. He had validated her actions in front of the entire room, in front of the councilman, in front of Mrs. Vanderbilt, in front of all the people who had watched her be humiliated. He had just told the world that she was right, and the entire structure of this restaurant was wrong. Then, as if remembering a final unpleasant piece of housekeeping, he slowly turned back. He did not face Mr. Davies fully. He just glanced at him over his shoulder, his voice returning to the chilling, flat tone of command. Mr. Davies looked up, his face slick with tears and sweat, a desperate, animal hope in his eyes that maybe, just maybe, this was all a terrible warning. Mr. Sterling crushed that hope with two words. "You are fired." The words were not shouted. They were spoken with the flat, simple finality of a gavel ending a trial. Mr. Davies let out a small, strangled sound, a wounded animal noise, and he physically crumpled, sliding down the host stand to the floor. He was a broken man. The CEO, son, Mr. Sterling, looked at the two security guards who had been standing by the entrance, watching the entire drama unfold with professional neutrality. His gaze was all the instruction they needed. They began to move forward. "Security will escort you out," Mr. Sterling said, his voice void of all emotion. Now, the final word was a sharp, clean cut. The trial was over. The sentence was being carried out. The two security guards, who had been standing like statues, moved forward with silent, professional efficiency. They did not run. They walked, their footsteps muffled on the thick carpet. They reached Mr. Davies, who was still a crumpled, weeping mess against the host stand. One guard took his left arm, the other took his right. They lifted him to his feet as if he weighed nothing. Mr. Davies did not resist. He was beyond that. He was a puppet with his strings cut, a hollow man. His face was a grotesque mask of tears and humiliation. They turned him toward the door. The silence in the dining room was absolute, a heavy funeral shroud. The only sound was the scuffing of Mr. Davies's expensive shoes as he was half walked, half dragged out of the kingdom he had ruled. He passed table 9, but Councilman Bright was suddenly fascinated by a spot on the tablecloth. He passed Mrs. Vanderbilt's table, but she was looking intently at her own diamond ring. No one would meet his eye. He was no longer powerful. He was just a problem being removed. The heavy glass door swung shut behind them, and he was gone. The bistro was left in a stunned, breathless void. Anna was still standing by the rail, her fingers locked around the silver tray, her body trembling from the adrenaline and the shock. She had just watched a man's entire life be dismantled in under 3 minutes. She felt dizzy. Then Mr. Sterling turned to her, his full, undivided attention. The entire room, which had been watching the door, snapped its focus back to them. What would happen now? The CEO's son walked toward her, his footsteps calm. He stopped a few feet away. The anger was gone, his face was neutral, his blue eyes analytical but not unkind. He looked at her, truly looked at her. "My father," he said, his voice clear in the silence, "also believes in promoting talent." Anna just stared, her mind blank, unable to process anything beyond the fact that Mr. Davies was gone. Mr. Sterling continued. "He believes that the person who runs this establishment should embody its true values." not the false, superficial ones on display here today. He believes in integrity. He believes in compassion. He believes in character. He paused, letting the words sink in. My father has instructed me to offer you the position. Anna's heart stopped. The position. What position? The position of general manager. Mr. Sterling stated, his voice flat, as if he were stating a fact, effective immediately. Anna's mind went completely blank. The silver tray, which she was still holding, suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Her fingers were numb. General manager. The words echoed in the vast, silent dining room, sounding foreign and nonsensical, like a language she had never heard. She stared at Mr. Sterling, her mouth slightly open. She was sure this was a dream, or a cruel, elaborate joke. She looked out at the sea of faces. Councilman Bright, who had watched her get pushed by Mr. Davies, was now staring at her with a new, dawning, and deeply respectful interest. Mrs. Vanderbilt, at table 3, had a look of stunned, almost delighted approval on her face, as if she were watching the finale of a particularly satisfying opera. The other servers, her colleagues, were frozen by the kitchen door, their expressions a mix of disbelief and pure, unadulterated joy. This could not be real. She was a waitress. She was here this morning terrified of being fired for a tiny crease in her apron, and now this man, this impossibly powerful man, was offering her the very job of the tyrant who had just been dragged out. She finally found her voice, a small, thin sound that was barely a whisper. General, manager, but she stammered, shaking her head. I am just a waitress. I do not know how to run a restaurant. I do not know about the budgets, or the wine orders, or the staffing. She was trying to make him see his mistake. It was a mistake. It had to be. For the first time, the ice in Mr. Sterling's features cracked. His sharp, angled face softened, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was not a large smile, but it was genuine, and it completely transformed him, changing him from a cold authority figure into a human being, a kind human being. My father and I disagree, he said, his voice softer now. We think you already know the most important part. You know how to treat people. You showed more leadership and more integrity in those 5 minutes yesterday than that man, he nodded toward the door, showed in his entire career. You protected the most important asset in this room. And it was not the furniture. He took a step closer. The rest, Anna, that is just paperwork. Budgets and wine lists can be taught. Character cannot. He paused, letting his words land. It is a big job, a very serious position, and it requires a longer discussion. My father, Arthur, is feeling much better this morning. He specifically asked to thank you himself. He and I would like to discuss the details with you over dinner tonight. He looked at her, his gaze steady, an offer, not a command. If you will join us. Anna looked at this man, her future, her entire life, changing in that one suspended moment. She let out the breath she had been holding. She straightened her spine. And for the first time she let the heavy silver tray down on a nearby table. Yes, she said, her voice clear, and for the first time that day, strong. Yes, I will. If you believe that one act of courage can change a life, please show your support by giving this story a like. It's the best way to help us create more videos just like this. And let us know in the comments below what was the most powerful moment for you, so that you never miss another story where kindness wins. Subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. We are committed to bringing you tales that prove integrity is always rewarded. Finally, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the world is watching. You never know if the person you help is connected to the person who can change your entire future. Thank you for listening.